Are Luke and Rey similar characters? It's a conversation that seems to come up every now and then where someone will make a long-winded post detailing precisely all the reasons why they think Rey is a Mary Sue and such a terrible character before people, admittedly like myself, come along to point out that many of their complaints seem to line up almost point for point with Luke Skywalker, which seems to really chap their asses because they really don't like the idea that this horrible Mary Sue type character could ever hold a candle in any way, in any shape or form, with any kind of comparability to the great Luke Skywalker. And recently I came across a post that I probably would ignore under most circumstances, but there was enough people commenting, "Yas, Queen," in agreement that made me feel like, well, I was going to let it go. But originally, when I first read this, I did go in wanting to see another person's perspective and try and figure out, like, what's this guy's issue? Maybe he's got some valid points. Let's see if what he says pans out, and maybe he'll have things to say that I've never accounted for before. So let's see what this guy has to say. Everyone complains about Rey being a Mary Sue, but isn't Luke the same way? Sure, he was trained by Yoda for like a month, but Anakin/Vader had been trained to fight and kill since he was a child. Ha 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 ha. No, not even close. Oh, I'll be making you eat those words with your own words shortly. Luke had raw talent, but he was trained by Kenobi and Yoda. And when he ran off half-cocked to face Vader, what happened? Yep, he loses that fight along with his hand. Answer me this. Does Rey have any character flaws? And if she does she pay any penalty for it? Do those penalties have any lasting consequences? Physical or emotional scars, loss of life or limb, that she must overcome in order to move forward? Accusing Luke Skywalker of being the same way he isn't doesn't excuse Rey's problems as a character. As for Anakin/Vader, he did have more training, but he was also past his prime and more interested in turning Luke to the dark side rather than beating him in combat. Luke lost fights, lost comrades, and lost his hand. He had raw talent but needed training. All he had in the beginning was potential. In his last confrontation with Vader, it was Luke's ferocity and youth that turned the tables on an older and less agile opponent. Most importantly, it was Luke's belief in his father's redemption and Vader's final act to protect his son that won the day. Palpatine would have killed Luke otherwise. There was no "I am all the Jedi" moment for Luke Skywalker. Everything Rey was given, Luke had to earn. Luke had to help rescue Leia and fight beside Han and Chewie to earn their trust and friendship. Rey was given Han, Leia, and Chewie. Rey got his friends because Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm said so. Kathleen Kennedy and pals wanted Rey to be accepted by the fans without having to work for it. So she shoplifted Luke Skywalker's friendships, abilities, and talent with the Force. And there's a little bit that keeps going, but I'll get to that later. Let's go through the initial part of his post and see if we can make some comparisons, because he does say it's not even close. You can't compare Luke Skywalker with Rey. It's not even close. Okay, we'll see. Luke had raw talent, but he was trained by Kenobi and Yoda, and when he ran off half-cocked, what happened? Yep, he loses his hand along with the fight. Okay, so right there we already have some issues. He's kind of combining, yes, he got some training from Kenobi, but it wasn't exactly extensive. It's actually possibly the only in-movie combat scenario training that we actually see Luke perform that had him using his lightsaber and blocking blaster bolts with his eyes covered, which he somehow manages to translate into making an impossible shot. This is the only training that we ever see Luke get from Obi-Wan throughout the entire first movie. And there's absolutely no reason to believe that Luke got any further training from Obi-Wan even after his death, because pretty much at the start of The Empire Strikes Back, when Luke sees Obi-Wan's Force Ghost for the first time, he's completely confused because he believed Obi-Wan was dead, and he's very clearly hasn't heard from Obi-Wan since he's died, or at least since the last time he heard Obi-Wan's voice speaking into his head. And if he had been getting extra training from Obi-Wan that entire time, what exactly is the necessity of even introducing Yoda as another Jedi Master for him to train? What exactly is it that Yoda could impart upon Luke in terms of wisdom that Obi-Wan as another Jedi Master would not be capable of conveying to Luke? Yes, Yoda is objectively smarter, and in terms of what we see Yoda teach Luke, the only thing Yoda conveys to Luke throughout his entire time training with him on Dagobah is all pacifistic training. The only time Luke activates his lightsaber on Dagobah that we see in the movie, and not in deleted scenes because we're not counting that, is for a Force vision test that even Yoda tells him he won't need his weapons for. So it's very clearly, it's not a combat training scenario. It's merely a test of his own morality and mental state to warn Luke of what he will become if he goes in trying to fight Vader with malicious intent. But I will admit that's a little bit petty of me on this account, because yes, he does get training from Obi-Wan. The only thing I'm really irked by is the idea that Obi-Wan and Yoda gave him equal parts training when it was one very vague lesson that Luke somehow translates later on without having any further contact from Obi-Wan into just inventing the Force pull, which didn't exist until The Empire Strikes Back. I think it's far more generous to say that if anyone who actually trained and taught Luke any significant lessons in being a Jedi, it is Yoda every day of the week, because he spent objectively far more time training Luke that we see on screen. So just that little correction there, Yoda's the only one that he was really training, and that's not nothing to sneeze at, because I mean, Yoda is one of the best Jedi that has ever existed, and he's just objectively the smartest person in the galaxy. But it is that extra bit at the end that also ties into something he says later, which is another reason why I'm taking issue with this part. It's just, it all jumps around, so I have to jump around. But then we get to the part where he says, as for Anakin / Vader, he did have more training, but he's also past his prime, half machine, and more interested in turning Luke to the dark side rather than beating him in combat. Well, again, we can make that same comparison with Kylo. Firstly, past his prime doesn't really amount for anything when his cybernetics literally are making him physically stronger than the average person. So it's not like Vader is physically weaker. His own cybernetics should make him physically stronger than Luke. But I do agree with the points that Vader wasn't trying to kill Luke. He wanted to turn him to the dark side. But we can make those same exact comparisons with Kylo in the situation where he's also suffering from debilitating wounds, he's bleeding out, he's mentally unstable, which throughout Star Wars has shown if your mental stability is in question or just completely shattered, you can absolutely lose to objectively weaker opponents, such as Luke versus Vader, for example. But there's a bunch of others. I've named them before, but the idea that Vader's past his prime, I'm sorry, isn't he supposed to be the chosen one where he's the best ever at everything? If he's the chosen one, how could he possibly lose? I mean, people like this always give Anakin and Vader the benefit of the doubt to any incredible acts of power that he has, when he's an incredible pilot at age 9, when he has more midichlorians than any Jedi that's ever lived, when he's able to master becoming a Jedi at a much older age without as much training as Jedi that have literally been trained since they've been children. But it's all overlooked because, oh, he's the chosen one, so he just gets to be good at those things. You know, imagine for a minute if Rey was like that. If Rey had that convenient plot element just given to her, where the story just says, yeah, she's the best at all these things because she's the chosen one of this new generation. It's a completely new prophecy that a new chosen one would come along. Why would we ever assume that there's only going to be one chosen one ever? You can imagine what these people would say. Oh, that's so convenient, and oh, it's just them empowering some female character because reasons. I think I'm wrong? Well, we're going to get to that in just a minute. But it's also very clear that during Kylo's fight with Rey in their very first fight, despite all the debilitating wounds he's got from the gunshot to his guts, to a slash to his dominant arm, to being completely mentally broken from killing his father, all of which should severely weaken him as a person, unless we're saying that pain should fuel him and make him much stronger, in which case the idea that Luke should be able to easily overpower Vader has no bearing, because Vader, his entire body is in pain night and day. He should be just in a constant state of power up because of the fact that he is constantly in pain. So either we have to accept that Vader should have just overwhelmingly mopped the floor with this kid that had generously a year and a half of pacifism training with Yoda. We have to apply that with Kylo at the same time. Or we just follow the logical line of events where if an opponent is damaged or mentally unstable or they don't have the commitment to try and actually kill their opponent, they are in a position to get their butts kicked. And that's what we can see with Kylo, because he is objectively trying to capture Rey and bring her over to the dark side. He literally at a point offers to be her teacher.
You need a teacher! I could show you the ways of the Force!
Not exactly something you say with someone that you're intending to cut the head off of. Kylo doesn't want to kill Rey. It's because he sees something special about her, and then he wants her to be trained in the dark side to be one of his minions or his apprentice or whatever it is. But that's the exact same situation that Vader found himself with Luke, where Vader wasn't wanting to kill Luke. He wanted to lure him to the dark side. Kylo wanted to lure Rey to the dark side, so he's not going in as hard as he should have. But the idea that Vader lost because he was caught off guard and surprised by Luke's strength, I mean, yep, that looks like the face of a guy who's not being constantly surprised. But the story also goes out of its way to show that when Rey is the one that is mentally unstable, when she is not balanced, she can be overwhelmingly beat by Kylo with relative ease. I do agree with this next part though, because it only serves to back up my point. Most importantly, it was Luke's belief in his father's redemption and Vader's final act to protect his son that won the day. Palpatine would have killed Luke otherwise, yada yada yada. Yes, because it was Luke's belief in his father's redemption that put the conflict in Vader, that made him so conflicted he wouldn't fight Luke at his full power. Vader doesn't lose to Luke because he's past his prime. Even if he was, his skill in battle and his cybernetics would still make him overwhelmingly a better fighter than Luke, regardless of any power-ups that Luke had, despite him having only a year's worth of pacifism training with Yoda, even though this guy says that he only got a week's training, which I'm literally saying this to help his argument. I just have heard on multiple occasions that between the events of The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, there's like multiple months in between those events, close to a year, maybe not a full year, but let's just say a year, because Rey also literally gets a year's worth of training from Leia, and we actually see she gets combat training, and we also see that she's reading from the Jedi texts. This is a year's worth of training and study of the Force and combat fighting techniques, which is leagues above anything we've ever seen Luke or even Anakin go through in their respected trilogies. We don't see Luke studying from books or training specifically in combat long term. We don't really see Anakin do that either. Specifically only with Rey, we see her engaging in far more times doing combat related training than the other two characters combined. And that's on top of the fact that at the very start of her story, relatively speaking, they establish that she is combat capable. Answer me this, does Rey have any character flaws? If she does she pay a penalty for it? Do those penalties have any lasting consequences? Physical or emotional scars, loss of life or limb that she must overcome in order to move forward? I'm actually really happy that this person included emotional scars, because typically people don't usually account for emotional scars. Like, emotional damage can be just as debilitating as physical damage. So I'm actually going to give credit where credit is due. I wasn't anticipating for someone like this to actually include emotional scars, because typically most people just think, oh, it's only physical damage. Physical damage is the only thing that actually matters, and that's just not true. Does Rey have any character flaws? Yeah. Do you not know them? Okay, Rey is very clearly a very insecure person. A big part of her story arc is that she is someone who desperately wants someone to show her her place in the galaxy, especially if it's someone of significant importance, like the childhood legends that she's grown up with, Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, Han Solo, people she ends up meeting and she desperately clings to and gravitates towards because she wants them to give her the same kind of significant whisking off to bigger and better things lifestyle that she heard the legends of Luke Skywalker being about, of this nobody farm boy that's living on some desert, desolate, nowhere planet who gets whisked off to bigger and better things by a person of significance. And a big portion of what Rey's character arc is, and I know people like to pretend she doesn't have a character arc, but her character arc throughout the sequel trilogy is a person who is looking for someone to show her her place in the galaxy, and she comes to learn that responsibility falls singularly on her shoulders. The only person in the galaxy that can show you what your place is in anything is you. That is her character arc. But she has to learn that through her adventure. I could also add things like she's downright naive at times and impulsive to the point it endangers the people around her. And there's even a point where she literally thinks she's accidentally killed someone that she cares about. And yeah, that is the look of mental trauma because of her inability to control her emotions. But it's when he brings up this part right here where he talks about physical and emotional damage that I find interesting, and I really want to talk about that for a minute, because how is he quantifying that? How would you quantify that? What are the parameters of physical and emotional damage that you think maybe this guy's referring to, or what you would deem as acceptable for this situation? But he also specifies that this is physical or emotional damage that has long-lasting repercussions that they have to overcome. When I think about physical scars, lasting physical scars, I would assume what he's talking about is something that is a constant hindrance to the character because of the physical damage that they've suffered from. And really, in terms of physical damage, yes, Luke loses a hand, but very shortly afterwards, he gets a brand new robotic hand that's apparently capable of feeling pain, complete with a skin overlay that makes it indistinguishable from his original hand, thus seemingly making the loss of his hand kind of inconsequential to begin with. And it's not like there's a point throughout the rest of Star Wars where there's a time where he's grimacing and like massaging his wrist because he has nerve damage or anything like that. The only times Luke even references that he even has a robotic hand from that point forward is in one case where it's a complete benefit to him when he gets shot in that hand, and he does grimace because his hand's been damaged, but he's still capable of swinging a lightsaber and holding on to things with it, which pretty much means there's no significant consequence to the damage his hand sustained. And the only time after that is when he's beaten Vader down and lopped off one of his hands, and he's contemplating killing Vader, where he stops for a minute when the Emperor's praising him and he reflects on what he's seeing in front of him. He sees Vader's severed hand and the mechanics underneath, and he looks at his own hand and he's reflecting on what he's becoming. But the loss of his hand isn't a consequence of his situational moment where he's looking at Vader. It's just used as a self-reflection moment, because the failure Luke suffered that cost him his hand was his own ignorance in that moment, while the situation that Luke's going through with Vader is him reflecting on realizing that the decisions he is making don't have to do with his ignorance but his temper. Ultimately, it's a lot like what I've heard a lot of people complain about in the past, where a movie establishes a hero with some kind of ailment, some kind of hindrance of some kind that is very shortly afterwards remedied with some magical cure-all thing, which then brings up the question, why did you even bother taking the time to establish them having that kind of issue if you're just going to remedy it immediately and then never talk about it again? For example, with Batman in The Dark Knight Rises, they establish him early on as having a weaker body, his body's kind of deteriorating, his bones don't have enough marrow in it anymore, so he's physically weaker, but then he puts on these magical braces that just magical cure-all it, and it's never addressed again. Even when he gets beaten by Bane and thrown in that pit, he still has those braces and his body still works the way it's done throughout the entirety of the film when he's fighting as Batman. And to me, what would signify as a far more significant consequence of his ailment would be if he loses those braces when he's put in that pit. And he has to reflect on the fact that he is a billionaire. He had all the money in the world and his body just can't keep up with it anymore. He got beat at the peak of his strength at that time against Bane, who utterly wiped the floor with him and then took his leg braces away, leaving him a cripple in this hole. And all the money in the world can't save him from the fact that his body is simply going to eventually give out. He cannot keep going as Batman indefinitely, no matter how much money he has. But we don't ever see that. It's just he gets these leg braces on and he's Batman for the rest of the movie, even when he gets his butt kicked. But throughout the rest of Luke's story, Luke's loss of hand is never a long-lasting hindrance that he ever has to overcome. There's never a moment where he's grimacing and rubbing his wrist, or it's hindering his capabilities to fight in battle, unless we're getting super pedantic and nitpicky by saying, oh, well, it made it a little bit difficult for him to hold on to that antenna thing when he escaped Vader. Okay, yeah, that's significant enough for you? And you're wondering why I don't take you seriously. Okay. In relation to Rey, he specifies both physical and emotional damage, which makes me assume that he believes that Luke has suffered both, or that either one would suffice for the sake of proving that Rey has endured enough to be considered not a Mary Sue or comparable to Luke or whatever. In which case, she has suffered both. When she goes to try and turn Ben and taken into custody by the First Order, where she's then tortured by Snoke before having to fight his Praetorian guards, where she sustains this slash to her arm, which, just a little side thing, that scar that she then gets as a result is in the shape of two hands like coming together, like earlier in the story where Ben and Rey were like doing that hand thing, which I thought was always a nice little touch. But it is a physical scar that she does take, but it doesn't have any lasting repercussions, much like Luke didn't have any lasting repercussions as a result of losing his hand. And it is in relation to her failure, because she goes to try and save Ben and bring him back to the light, and she fails. She's not able to convince him to come back to the light side. But she wouldn't have sustained that damage to her if she hadn't tried. In terms of mental anguish or mental traumas that these characters have to overcome, again, everything this guy references seems to be pretty either inflated in favor of Luke or just completely omitted away from Rey's case entirely, which would make sense given that he doesn't reference anything in terms of differences between Luke and Rey. What mental traumas do these characters have to overcome that they've suffered from? The closest thing I could think of is something like Luke learning that he is the son of who he perceives to be at that time the most evil man in the galaxy. And it emotionally crushes him. And it does look like he is very traumatized as a result of it. Which we could also say the same thing for Rey when she learns that she is actually related to the most evil man in the galaxy. And it very clearly has a negative effect on her, so much so that she literally runs away and hides, and she needs help. Similar to how Luke, once he learns that he is Vader's child, he needs counseling from his Jedi Masters, from Yoda and from Obi-Wan, to talk to him and break things down for him to help him cope and process this information and come to terms with the truth. Rey has a similar moment with Luke, where when she learns that she is related to Palpatine in some way, and she runs off to hide, to sequester herself, to close herself off the same way she saw Luke do, because she doesn't want that to be her legacy, and she doesn't want to be related to that kind of legacy. Luke has to come to her as a Force ghost to help her through and overcome her emotional trauma of being related to Palpatine. And again, we could get super pedantic about other losses, that other kind of emotional traumas that these characters have faced, where Luke losing Obi-Wan definitely seemed to have an emotional trauma for a guy he met 20 minutes ago. And we could say the exact same thing for Rey, where she loses Han. She loses her parents, her adoptive parental figure with Leia, who also serves as a mentor figure, which, counting her along with Luke and Han, these are three mentor figures that she grew attached to in the exact same amount of time that Luke had with Obi-Wan, at the minimum. For characters like, let's say, Han and Luke, Rey meeting the literal heroes of her childhood, heroes that she is established to have knowledge of because she's grown up hearing the legends of Han Solo, Princess Leia, and Luke Skywalker. Nobody has to explain to her who these characters are, because she knows who they are, because that's the design of her character. She is supposed to represent your average Star Wars fan who would know these characters. Because by this point in her story, the entire galaxy knows the legend of Luke Skywalker, Leia, and Han defeating the Empire. which I think would be a far more significant loss for me. Even if I met someone like Luke Skywalker for 5 minutes and they died right in front of me, that would hit me a lot harder than some old dude that I met 5 minutes ago, had no prior history with or prior knowledge of. But Rey has met her hero, someone she grew up hearing stories about and lost. And to give a little bit more credit to Rey, when she loses Han, that trauma still exists throughout the preceding movies. And she's still mourning his loss. While with Luke, he loses his mentor figure for sure, and a nice guy at that, but seemingly overcomes that loss rather quickly. But at the very least shows some kind of mourning for the loss of the mentor figure he had for 20 minutes, but not, his family members that were brutally murdered, who don't get to go to Jedi heaven. Just saying, how many times did he bring up about Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru? That's a little awkward, I think. And then we get to this last part that I saved for the very end. Everything Rey was given, Luke had to earn. Luke had to help rescue Leia and fight beside Han and Chewie to earn their trust and friendship. Rey was given Han, Leia, and Chewie. Rey got those friends because Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm said so. Kathleen Kennedy and pals wanted Rey to be accepted by the fans without having to work for it. So they shoplifted Luke Skywalker's friendships, abilities, and talent with the Force. Right there. There's a lot to unpack there, but let's go near the end of that part there. Literally by stating that they shoplifted Luke Skywalker's friends, abilities, and talents, the person who made this post is making that comparison that those qualities were taken from Luke. For him to make that comparison and make that connection from Luke Skywalker to Rey, that would actually discredit his earlier claim that, not even close, that Rey and Luke are similar characters. How can they not be similar characters if, by your own words, they've shoplifted all these character traits and friendships and abilities from Luke Skywalker to Rey? But earlier, it says, everything Rey was given, Luke had to earn. And that Rey was given Han, Leia, and Chewie. Like, how are you quantifying that exactly? Like, as easily as you say that Rey was just given these things, that she didn't earn these things, I can just as easily and blankly look at you in the face and say, yes, she actually did earn those things. Like, how did she not? I don't understand. But more so, all this does is show this person's complete shallowness, who's either being completely disingenuous, or this is a person that just does not pay attention to Star Wars for the plot. Because he is comparing Han and Leia of the sequel trilogy as if they are the exact same characters at the start of Luke's journey in the original trilogy, and that's just not true. These characters have developed over the course of their lives, at least from the events of the original trilogy. Yes, Rey does have an easier time befriending someone like Han because Han has developed beyond the person he was at the start of the original trilogy. The reason why Luke has to work so much harder than Rey to become Han's friend at the start of Han's journey is because Han is a scoundrel. He has lived a hard life of backstabbing and smuggling and living amongst other backstabbers and smugglers and bounty hunters. He has trust issues and his trust has to be earned. But when he travels with Luke Skywalker, he learns that he doesn't have to be so distrusting. He doesn't have to think everyone's out to get him. He can trust Luke without question, that he can trust that Luke isn't out to get him or want anything from him other than his friendship. And it's through spending time with good people like that that evolves his character into becoming a more honorable man. So much so that it's completely reasonable that by the time of the sequel trilogy, when Rey meets Han, Han is just going to look at Rey as though he's seeing Luke for the very first time, see her for the genuinely good person that she is, and not need her to prove herself as much as he needed Luke to. He knows her morality. He knows he doesn't need to be suspicious of her. But even still, Rey does things that earn his approval. With Leia, her story starts with her being a hot-headed rebel leader. And she's of course a hot-headed type person because she's dealing with a rebellion. She's dealing with the stresses of a rebellion and all the responsibilities that are being thrown on her shoulders at such a young age. So it's logical that when she meets Luke for the very first time, she needs this random farm boy that she's never met before to earn her trust. By the events of the sequel trilogy, she's become a far more collected, even-headed, and calm person, especially by the fact that she became a mother as well as marrying the most frustrating man in the galaxy. By the point of the sequel trilogy, if Leia isn't just mentally numb from bullshit, that would be the only unrealistic thing of the Star Wars trilogy, far more than the magic, okay? But she becomes a mother-like figure. She doesn't need other people to earn her trust as extensively as Luke needed to at the start of Leia's story, because she's evolved and adapted as a character. But this idea that Rey didn't earn any of the powers or any of the abilities or the friendships that she made along the way is just insane. Because as easily as this person says, she doesn't earn it, because you're not accounting for everything she's been through. Rey has suffered losses. Rey has suffered trauma. From getting knocked unconscious multiple times, to thinking she's hurt people she cares about, to losing significant people in her life, people that she takes on as her adoptive family, to having her life force taken from her, to literally dying. And in terms of getting comparative between Rey and Luke, in terms of traumas that these characters have faced, in which we give Luke so much leeway for, Rey has arguably suffered far more. Because the people she loses, they don't just conveniently come back as Force ghosts, except with Luke. When she loses Leia, she's gone for the entirety of the story, up until the very end. When she loses Han, she never sees Han again. When she loses Ben, she never sees Ben again. At least as far as the movies are concerned. I'm not counting other outside information. Let's just keep it to the movies. When she loses her parents are gone. Every failure and every loss and every bit of damage that Luke has suffered, Rey has suffered as well, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. Like Luke, Rey has lost her parental figures. Like Luke, Rey has lost her mentor figures. Like Luke, Rey has been tortured. Rey has been knocked out. And it was only until the sequel trilogy that they had one other thing in common. They both died fighting to make the galaxy a better place. And yeah, Rey gets revived at the cost of someone that she also came to care for with Ben Solo. And as much as I really don't like the idea that those two were becoming a romantic relationship, that is still a romantic relationship that she lost, that Luke never lost in his respected trilogy. Luke didn't lose a love interest unless we're counting with his sister. But it's really the last paragraphs of this comment that is what's really telling. Rey and Luke are not the same. Luke is a hero and an icon. Rey is little more than a female empowerment avatar for Kathleen Kennedy. I'll stop it there because the rest of his comment is just dribble. That last sentence is what literally devalues the entire rest of his argument. Because literally what this guy's issue is can be boiled down to that last sentence. It has nothing to do with the comparability between Rey and Luke. It has to do with this guy's vague suspicion that Rey was made as a female empowerment figure for Star Wars and promoting it as if that's a bad thing. And for the people out there that don't like Rey or don't like sequels, which is 100% fine, but if you've ever run into other fans who've accused you of being a sexist for not liking Rey for whatever reason, you need to understand it's literally because of comments like this that screw you over, because these people speak on your behalf. And because there isn't enough of you out there telling these people to rightfully shut the fuck up and sit down, you're unfortunately looped in with these people. Because by that very comment, what that exposes, what all that implies, is this is a person that does not like female empowerment, which is just feminism, which for any of you who are not yet aware, because this guy has issue with leftist politics, very clearly. None of this has to do with any of the comparability between Luke and Rey. It just has to do with this political narrative that he doesn't like. But unfortunately, for those of you who haven't caught up with reality yet, newsflash, Star Wars was fundamentally built on politics. Leftist politics that include female empowerment. Princess Leia is a female empowerment figure. Ahsoka is a female empowerment figure. Jyn Erso is a female empowerment figure. Padme is a female empowerment figure. But this guy takes issue with Rey because she's the one that's front and center. And he doesn't like that. And it's very clear because he has to hide that with this long-winded diatribe of bullshit that we just went through and point for point made comparisons for throughout this entire argument that this guy either conveniently overlooks or intentionally overlooks to make a poor argument. Also, he can slip in at the very end this vague suspicion of this malicious intent that Rey was invented as a female empowerment figure, as if that's a bad thing. Even if we were to take that at face value, why is that an issue? Why would that be any more of an issue than to say Luke is a male empowerment figure, Han is a male empowerment figure? These are good men who represent good qualities that people should represent in life, should represent in themselves and in the actions and the things that they do in life. What is wrong with Rey doing the same thing? Other than this guy doesn't like the idea of female empowerment. That's why some of you get called sexists, because people like this speak on your behalf. Anyway, that's today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you tune in for the next video. I've got some other things I want to make videos on, things I think fans of Star Wars really need to stop saying, otherwise they just continue to sound really freaking silly. And some other ideas that I've got in the works that, you know, will come out when they come out. But I hope to see you in those videos, and thanks for watching. See you. Bye.